First of all, everybody in the group, including Aaron, knows my name is Chris Boggs. I'm the commanding officer of the USS Blackstone. And tonight we have a very special guest with us. This is Dr. Erin MacDonald, who is an astrophysicist. Is that correct?
Well done. Yes.
As well as she is a consultant on Star Trek Prodigy, as well as several other shows. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And, and I want to thank everybody who had the opportunity of sending in some questions. I have forwarded those on to Erin so that she's not blindsided by anything tonight. Um, but we just, I guess the main thing is welcome. We're glad that you're here and with us.
Mhm.
It was great to talk with you at SpotCon, and I'm so glad that you had an opportunity to schedule this to meet with us. Um, you are presently in LA, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And you and I had talked a couple of maybe a month ago, right after the fires in California that were going on, and they're still going on. Is that correct?
It's fire season, but yes,
Mhm.
right now all of the big ones are out, thankfully, and we were not in any danger. We just had a lot of smoke to deal with and offering our place to some friends who were getting out, but everyone's safe, so I appreciate your concern.
Good. We're glad that everyone is okay. Um, so the first thing is, please tell us a little bit about yourself,
Mhm.
uh, your background, education, and how in the world you managed to decide on astrophysics compared to any other science field or anything else in that nature.
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, honestly, some of you may know me, some of you may not. So just really quick, yeah, I'm Erin. You'll hear people call me Dr. Erin. I don't require that. It's a way to differentiate me from all the other Erins who work on our shows. And it's just stuck over the years. But yes, so I grew up in Colorado. I decided to go into astrophysics, which I'll get into the details of that, but just to give the quick abridged version, I went and did my PhD overseas at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and then in astrophysics. And then I did research for a while. I went into teaching. Teaching didn't pay the bills, so I went into engineering. And in doing so, I really missed teaching. So I started going to conventions like SpotCon and some other local places and giving talks about science and Star Trek, but science and science fiction in general. And that we can get into more details of how that landed me working with Star Trek. But I started on season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, and I have been working on every show since then. And I know there were questions that were sent ahead of time, but if anyone has other ones that come up, I can handle a lot. So if you put them in the chat or however you want to deal with it, or your Discord or however is the best way, I'm more than happy to kind of keep going if there's something that comes up. But the question for how I got into astrophysics, it's funny because my career kind of came full circle because I was a kid who just loved TV and I would watch TV all the time. That was my world. I Love Lucy was like my favorite show, and so I saw everything I Love Lucy. I had a huge collection and knew all of the facts. I just loved this funny redheaded woman, and the more I'd heard about her career and obviously digging into all of that, I just fell in love with her. And then I eventually, the X-Files came out, and I was still growing up, but I was a little older. I was a teenager, and I just obsessively watched the X-Files because I was a little redheaded girl who loved aliens and got to watch this redheaded woman fight aliens with science. And she was just, Dana Scully was the coolest woman I'd ever seen in my entire life. And so she was sort of the first thing that made me want to be a scientist because she was just so cool. And some of you may have heard of the Scully effect, which was a study that was done, I want to say maybe 15 years ago now, by the Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media that studies sort of gender representation in media. And they did a massive sociological study of women pretty much like my age who grew up and the career paths that they went down and how much X-Files they watched. And the crazy thing that came out of that study was that if you were a young woman I think it was like 13 to 18 or whatever, who was a medium to heavy viewer of the X-Files, which would have been me, you were more than 50% more likely to go into science than a woman who grew up and didn't watch the X-Files. And so the numbers were just staggering, and they call it the Scully effect, that women were able to see themselves on TV as scientists, and it became something they wanted to do. And I'm absolutely a product of that. I also had the, pleasure, honor of growing up when Contact, the film, came out. That was another huge influence for me. Seeing this awesome woman, in the New Mexico desert, listening for alien signals. It was just so cool. And that was the first time I realized that astronomy was a job, that you could go and study space. And honestly, when it came to deciding what I wanted to do my degree in, when I wanted to go to college, I was ready for college, but I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. Part of me really wanted to study film. It was because I was so interested in TV. But then the other part of me was like, yeah, but spending 4 years just studying space sounds really cool. I don't have a career plan other than wanting to be Dana Scully, but I can go and study space for 4 years. And my father, who was helping out a little bit with college, was like, okay, film school or physics degree? I think we're going to influence one direction for that. And as I was going through my physics degree, it was really hard. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. I ended up double majoring in physics with astrophysics and mathematics. Really, really difficult. I was about a B student, and but I enjoyed it, and I was able to kind of keep up with all of it. But I loved research. I started doing undergraduate research in radio astronomy with a professor in that department. And similarly to how I chose my undergraduate degree, I was like, I think I want to go to graduate school and just keep studying space, because I got to do research and find new things in space. And it was an opportunity for me to move overseas. This was during the 2008 crisis as well, so there were like 0 jobs. And so grad school was a good option at the time. I got to go live overseas, did my PhD. I finished it in 4 years, which was a lot. Shaved at least 4 years off of my life trying to burn through it like that. But it was fun, and it was a really fun experience. So that's kind of how I got into astronomy. And ironically, it all came from television and movies.
Wow. That's pretty cool. As we all know, Lucille Ball is the driving force behind Star Trek and making sure that it stayed on the air. So that's pretty cool. What a tie-in.
One of my peak, I've had a few peak moments in my career, but one of them was when a fan put together all of the women who have worked on Star Trek, like notable women in Star Trek. And it was like DC Fontana, Lucille Ball, and I was on it. And I was like, ah!
That is awesome.
I'm part of that history. It was amazing.
So, how did you get involved with Paramount and Star Trek? How did that come to pass?
Right. So I mentioned that I started going to conventions when I was working in engineering, giving talks, because I just miss teaching. And I really do believe that popular culture is a great way to teach science. It's a great anchor point for people to have things to reference. And science fiction fans inherently, whether or not you have a scientific background, a lot of sci-fi fans have some interest in science. And so it's a great audience for it. And these became hugely popular. I started probably in like 2009, 2010. Dragon Con was the first convention I started going to and giving these talks, because they have a big space track and they have a big science track. So they were purely science talks to start with. Then I started folding in video games and Star Trek and Star Wars and all of that stuff into my talks. And I started going all over the country because I was making engineer money now. So I would spend my weekend going to these conventions just on my own dime and proposing panels, but they were just me teaching the physics of faster than light travel or artificial gravity. And while I was at these conventions, I started to meet a lot of actors that, maybe they were in those shows like The Expanse or Star Trek or something, and they would see, oh, the science of Star Trek, and just thought that that was really cool. And so they would reach out and connect me. And it kind of just reached a point, there's lots of events and things that go on in our lives where it kind of, you find yourselves at a crossroads and trying to decide which is the right way. And I kind of reached a point where I was like, I think it's time for me to move to Los Angeles. I'm still just working in engineering, but everything is kind of converging to lead me down this path. And so I moved to LA. I got an engineering job with my same company out of LA Air Force Base, and just worked here as an engineer. But that led me to meet a ton more people who were friends of folks I'd met at conventions, a couple of whom worked at CBS and were on Star Trek Discovery, which was just in its infancy. But they connected me to the CBS folks who brought me to the licensed Star Trek Las Vegas event as part of their CBS stage. So they kind of would program one stage at that convention. And I gave my physics talks there, and they were like, oh, it turns out fans are really into the science, which like is not a surprise to any of us, but it's a good reminder for the corporate people to see that from time to time. And so I started doing Star Trek, official CBS Star Trek events. And then season 3 of Star Trek Discovery was kind of hitting the reboot button. They got a new showrunner. They were going into the future. And this new showrunner, Michelle Paradise, she really wanted to hire scientists to help with the storylines that season. So my name got thrown into the pot. That season went really well. I did sort of the science of the burn and one other episode that season, and had a talk with the people at CBS. And I was kind of offered myself, and I just said, hey, I'm in LA. You have all these other shows. Would you like to have a in-house science person? And they said, that's a great idea. And so that was just over 5 years ago now.
Oh.
So yeah, it's been a long road getting from there to here.
So, which shows have you worked on as far as the Star Trek, I guess, canon, non-canon, however you want to call it? Which shows have you been a part of?
So I started on season 3 of Discovery, and again, that wasn't really the whole season. It was a couple of storylines. But then I worked on 4 and 5 of Discovery. I worked on season 2 and 3 of Picard, so I wasn't on season 1 of that. I worked on everything including season 2 onwards of Lower Decks. So I wasn't on season 1, but I did everything after that. And then I did everything on Prodigy and everything on Strange New Worlds and the upcoming Starfleet Academy. I'm still involved.
Wow,
So yeah.
wow.
Yep.
That's you blew my mind. I don't know about anybody else, but you just blew my mind with that. So you actually have a character or an officer that's part of Prodigy, that's part of Janeway's crew, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
What is her rank, and is it
Okay.
actually you?
Yeah. So I'll tell the story how this happened in case people aren't familiar with it. So if you haven't watched Star Trek Prodigy, you should, because it's great. As a Star Trek fan, like, it's fantastic. Season 2, I think genuinely, as a Star Trek fan, is one of the greatest Star Trek seasons of any Star. That's beside the point. I'm biased. But as we were developing season 1, they brought me in, and I have a Voyager tattoo on my arm. And so they sat me down and they just said, like, we hear you have Voyager tattooed on your arm. I was like, oh no, they found out I'm a nerd. And they had just, like, that week signed Kate Mulgrew to come back as Captain Janeway. So they knew I was highly invested in this. But the main reason they wanted me there was to help develop one of the characters on the show, which is Rock Talk. She's a young girl who decides over the course of the show that she's actually interested in science, and it kind of tracks her whole journey, not even knowing that a science career is a thing, to trying to figure out which science she likes and then start investigating more of that path. So we spent hours going through my whole journey of trying out different sciences, all the ups, all the downs, days in the labs, friends that I had, all of this into building Rock Talk. And so at the end of season 1, the kids, spoiler alert, get to Starfleet Academy. And the showrunners said, well, Rock Talk has to meet Dr. Erin. So, and this was like, it was a nice honor. They gave me a line. I went in to record it. This was deep in pandemic. I had to do all of, like, I had to take all the different angles of my face at home. And so they animated it after me. I got to see the little proofs. They made me a lieutenant commander, which I'm not angry about. I was good with that. It was a quick promotion. It was a field promotion to lieutenant commander. And then but I wasn't even going to believe it until it aired. And sure enough, like I made the cut and I got a little moment, but I wasn't named or anything. I was in the credits as Lieutenant Commander MacDonald. But then in season 2, we had a huge time travel storyline, and they already had the assets for me. And they were like, well, like kids watching the show may not have even seen Back to the Future yet. You know, these are sort of 8 to 12-year-olds. They don't know what time travel stories are, so we need a Jurassic Park style Mr. DNA, like, here's your introduction to time travel. So they had me write that bit, and I came in and recorded it, and that was properly like, hi, I'm Dr. Erin, professor at Starfleet Academy, and here's Temporal Mechanics 101.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really, like, just the deepest, coolest honor of my life, for sure.
That is, boy. That is that a future tattoo? Is to get her image on your arm someday? Someday.
Yeah, one day I'll get something honoring her. I did commission the whole uniform, so like
Nice.
proper uniform. So that felt pretty good.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And you happen to have one of our com badges, don't you?
I do.
We gave you a com badge, so you have an official one from the Blackstone.
I
somewhere.
do, absolutely. My drawer, my entire drawer of, I have an absurd amount of com badges.
Oh, I'm sure you do. I'm sure everybody gives you one.
But I'm so grateful for that. That was so fun. Yeah, thank you. I was so touched because I know, and of course you've got like that element of time in it as well. And so
oh, definitely, of course. So, what are the most and least scientifically accurate things in the shows that you've worked on?
Love it. You know, there's so many stories I could tell. So I think like so just to rewind, like when you work on one of these shows, any sci-fi shows as a science advisor, I think the first thing you need to do is figure out where on the spectrum of science to fiction the show is landing. Like we all know as sci-fi fans, that's a huge spectrum of different types of shows because you have Farscape, you have The Expanse, you have all of these different things that are going to land different on that scale. Space magic versus hard space, real world science. And all of the Star Trek shows are different too. You know, Star Trek Discovery, especially season 3 onward, Michelle Paradise really wanted to make them scientists in space. And so that was a lot of not just advising on the technobabble that they were saying or the scientific storylines, but also how would a scientist react to this? So in season 4, we did a lot of work on, if you didn't see it, it's the DMA was sort of the big bad for the first half of the season. They call it the dark matter anomaly. It was this large gravitational well that was like 10 light years wide. And it ended up being like a dredge, that there was a little wormhole in the middle that was searching for boronite. And in doing so, we had to have them learn that and figure that out. And so they wanted help writing like, well, how would they do that? Like, what questions would they ask? What data would they look for? What else could be contenders? How would they rule that out? So honestly, like that episode where they figure out what the DMA is was probably the most scientifically accurate of a show that I've worked on because it was a whole scientific process, like the entire scientific process you got to see play out. And also the equations that Paul Stamets is analyzing in his lab are actually my handwriting. And they are general relativity equations for wormholes and exotic energy and all of that stuff. So that one, and then also the Species 10C, that's the name of the episode in that same season. That is probably one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek that I've worked on because it's a very Arrival style episode where they're trying to figure out how these aliens are communicating. And they narrow it down to like chemicals and pheromones mixed with lights, very sort of Close Encounters type vibe. But we did a lot of, because you think like math is a universal language, right? So if I can say 1 + 1 = 2, aliens should understand 1 + 1 = 2. But when you're like a math major, you learn that nothing is real and nothing matters anymore. What is plus? What does equals mean? What is a 1? And so, like, if you're going to communicate with a species, you have to find a way to establish those. We call those axioms. And so we worked that all into that episode of them figuring out the axioms of addition and null numbers and all of that. And so those two were probably like my favorite sciencey science episodes that we did.
Wow. What in your what is, I don't even know if you really want to answer this, but what is the least accurate of the episodes?
Well, so again, spectrum of science to fiction, like Lower Decks, we let a lot of stuff just wash over you. And even Strange New Worlds, I think, has a lot of episodes that are very TOS style, that if you take a second and step back and you're like, science, it falls apart because it's more philosophical. The musical episode has a lot of science in it, but so don't think about that one. But some of the other more philosophical ones, like a child powering a planet, right? Like that's, you start chipping away the science of that, it's going to fall apart. But that's not the point. And a lot of what I do when we start to go down some of these rabbit holes on these episodes, my advice is to say, don't explain it. Like, just let the episode happen. If you start to try to apply technobabble, try to apply some scientific logic to this, and not just let it happen, you're going to distract the audience. They're going to get confused. It's going to throw you off of the story. So, like, even in Lower Decks, right, they had an episode where they run into a Genesis ship, and all of the plants start growing out of the outside of it. And it's like, plants aren't going to grow in space, but it looked cool, and you weren't thinking about that in the moment, so it's fine.
You're just trying to get them from point A to point Z.
Right, exactly. It was a funny ending. We got to see all those plants growing.
Yeah. In general, is there one area of science, planet building, orbital mechanics, creature creation that Star Trek tends to get right the most?
I would say Star Trek has planets down, and I think like they do a great job of really maintaining that ethos of Strange New Worlds. And as our technology gets better and our CGI gets better, graphics and everything, really creating new world environments that we can visit and we can find. And I hate to keep harping on Discovery, but like we had some really cool planets. We did, again, species 10C, they discover originally lived in gas giants. And so they go and uncover like the archaeology of a species that lives on layers in a gas giant. And a lot of that, these writers come up with themselves. They're sci-fi writers. They're great at coming up with new worlds. I think you all are familiar that as sci-fi fans, or maybe sci-fi authors yourselves, world building is a big part of that job. And so these sci-fi writers are great at that. And Star Trek has a big lexicon for them to pull from, things like M-class planets, right? Just these terms that we know help shape those stories for them.
That actually goes into my the next question, which is the scientific literacy of the writers. Is it very high? Is it kind of medium? Or are they just relying on folks like yourself that have that science background to really help them shape and form the storyline?
A mix, and it depended again on the show. I think Discovery had a lot of sci-fi writers, again too, because it was the first one that Star Trek kind of brought back. So they brought in a lot of hard sci-fi writers for that show. And then if you think about the themes of each show that we have, you can kind of shape your mental writer's room for those. You probably have it right. So Discovery was very sci-fi writers. Lower Decks is comedy writers. Prodigy was children's writers. They all have some flavor of sci-fi in it. Or like in Picard too, Picard was a drama, you know, Picard was a character study. And so it was more drama writers and not necessarily sci-fi writers. And so they all pull from those different pools. But a lot of the sci-fi writers I worked with are people who are sci-fi, like that's their genre. They are very scientifically like literate. They come up with cool ideas. The most conflict I've ever had working with writers is this doesn't happen often, thankfully, but there are a couple writers who think they know a lot of science and they don't. And editing their scripts and maintaining a good relationship with them is really, really difficult because you don't because they've taken the train and ran away with it. Like they have an idea in their brain for some science thing and they've gone ahead and like conceptualized the whole story around it without ever asking if it's correct. And so having to course correct later in the game when they're already married to that idea makes for delicate relationship handling, and sometimes it's successful, some it's not. I think those are the more difficult situations that I've had to deal with, and again, thankfully it's not that many, but there are definitely a couple where a script comes on my desk and I'm like, oh no. Just all right, let me give
Wrong,
myself
wrong,
4 hours.
wrong.
Because too, like I want to be diplomatic. I don't want to tell them their baby is ugly, right? Like I want to work with them on the story. It's just having to take a few steps back when it's already so far down the road is sometimes really, really difficult.
Um, what's the most challenging part of your job when it comes to putting the actual science that we know versus theoretical science that tends to be a part of the show?
Yeah, I think what's hard, and it's a weird skill that I now have, is like being a futurist is really what it is, because you have to look at the science we know and the technology we have now and say, what is this going to look like in 400 years? What is this going to look like in 900 years? And try to extrapolate something from that. I think a good example of this was and I didn't come up with this. They had already done it, but we've kind of retconned a little bit of science into it. But was the programmable matter in Discovery. That was sort of a big leap forward that they did, where they went, all right, what technology does like the 24th century have? That now we're going forward 900 years. What technology is that going to look like? And one of those was having programmable matter that you hit a button and your ship reorganizes itself, or you're able to kind of build something out of nothing. And we put some cool science into that, like trying to think about how you would understand, take replicators, like how replicators are able to build something, 3D print essentially. And then how you'd be able to take that technology in 900 years. And that's basically super advanced replicator technology where the matter is rearranging itself in real time and reorienting itself. And so I think that's probably the hardest thing, is just getting creative with the science we already have. We're going to break science. There's going to be weird science fiction stuff. I mean, the transporter breaks science, right? Like it's but coming up with something like the Heisenberg compensator to compensate for the science you're breaking, that's the hard part. That's the really creative part that comes into it.
Um, how much how much work is theoretical branch of science versus what is actually known?
Along those lines, I think like what we did with the DMA, that we pulled on a lot of theoretical physics for that, because wormholes are still theoretical anyway. And then a lot of studies into tachyons, that's all theoretical, but it's still physics, it's still theoretical physics, as well as sort of exotic matter, other types of exotic matter that are out there. Stuff that I've pulled on, like when we did the burn and then factored into the season finale of Lower Decks, is this idea of complex subatomic fundamental particles. And I called them complex because I'm also a mathematician. And one of the coolest planes you can work in math is the complex plane. That's the combination of real numbers and imaginary numbers. And you can do cool stuff with that. So I extended the idea that we have our real world, that's our four-dimensional space-time, and the imaginary plane you can think of as subspace. And what if in the future we find molecules that are able to be in both, that exist in our world and in this imaginary plane? And that is a core component of dilithium. That dilithium, has some tap into subspace. That's how you're able to generate a lot of energy from it. But also we established that with the burn, because the dilithium resonant frequency shattered faster than the speed of light. So there's some subspace component to dilithium. And then we extended that into lower decks. If you watched the season finale, I think in episode 9, they talk about the complex gluon cores of Lily Sloan's ship. That was exactly the same thing. It was subatomic particles. So those are all theoretical physics grounding / made up by me that has some tap into real physics. But again, also, like you mentioned, managing all of the Star Trek canon as well, all of the not theoretical, but purely fictional things like warp drive and transporters and replicators, that all requires some level of understanding as well.
Um, Callbacks are a hallmark of Lower Decks. How do they come? How do they come about in the writing process? I guess James, you're the one who actually asked that question, and you may want to explain a little bit because I didn't understand quite what you were asking in that question.
Sure, sure. So, and I know you mainly get the script, after they've written it, but I'm just curious if you have insights. With Lower Decks, one of the big things that they did was call back to previous Trek canon for an inside joke. And so I was curious, like, are they coming on these shows just as a story emerges, or are they sitting around in the beginning of a season plotting, thinking about what specific anchors of Star Trek do they want to kind of poke at? Like, how does that come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things with the Lower Decks writers room is that they are they were RIP Lower Decks. They were about 50-50 diehard Star Trek fans and 50% comedy writers who really didn't know Star Trek. And I think that was a great balance, because the few times I would sit in that room, like all of us, right? We can pull Star Trek references out of anything. We can sit around and have a conversation. It'll remind us of this episode, or it'll remind us about this. And that's what that was like in that room. And then the non-Star Trek fans would have to rein in the Star Trek nerds and be like, because also I think why Lower Decks has been so successful at bringing in new Star Trek fans is because you don't have to know Star Trek to get the jokes that are in it, which I think is great. But if you do, it just enhances all of it. And so that was the work of the non-Star Trek comedy writers to go like, I don't know that reference, or that's going to take a lot of explanation. Are we sure we want to go down there? So they found that sweet balance. And then in terms of things like the characters and people that they were able to get back, honestly, like, so Mike McMahon was the showrunner, and he falls under the diehard Star Trek nerd category for sure. And they would be like, oh man, like Lily Sloan, they would write it in with their dream casting, that they want to bring back a character. And then Mike would, and I think he put this on Twitter, so I'm not being too indelicate with sharing sort of the inside stories, but like he would write a really passionate letter to these people and explain why the character means so much to them, why they wanted that character to be in the show, what the storyline is that they want to do respect. Like he just gave them all of the information so they could make that choice. And I'm pretty sure every single person they asked to come back did. As we all know, like, there are people that we thought would never ever come back into Star Trek that showed up in Lower Decks. And so I think, and he did them a good service. He made their characters really good, and so that was just really cool. And yes, comedy writers room is, I think I'm a relatively funny person, And a comedy writer's room is the most overwhelming place I've ever been in, because it's literally 10 hilarious people who are all competing for the funny laugh in the room. That's all they care. The conversation is just people trying to one up each other. And it's so overwhelming. But I hope that answers your question. I mean, I wasn't exactly in there all the time, but that was definitely how they approached writing.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.
Basically, you're saying that it's a science SNL pitch pitch room.
It really
Everybody's
is. It
trying to
was
get their joke in.
chaotic. And for me, each season, again, I had a different relationship with every single show. And the way Lower Decks would work was there was always like one, maybe two episodes where they would actually want some science planning before they went and wrote the episode. Season 5 was the most work I did, which was like kind of the conclusion and the multiverse thing. But the season finale for season 2, First Contact, which is still one of my favorite episodes, that was one where we started when they first had the idea, and they had me in there all the time talking about what that story was going to be, how the science was going to work, and so it wasn't often, but when I did, I worked really closely with them.
We had a late question that didn't get sent to you ahead of time, but have you worked on any futuristic concept devices, such as sonic screwdriver, tricorder, or dermal regenerator, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, like in real life or on Star Trek?
I'm assuming that this is via Star Trek or maybe in real life. Danny, I think Danny White. You're the one who actually asked that question.
No pressure.
If you want to try and answer that or ask that, I don't know if he's still there or not.
It's all good. No worries. Yeah. So like, I do, like I said, the dilithium was a good example of that, right? Oh, he popped in. Yeah.
Am I there?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are.
I got you.
Okay, there I am. Yeah, I was just looking for gadgets.
Fair enough. Yeah, it is. It's constant. And actually, like science advising, even on other shows, sometimes my department is the prop department. And there's been times, because, like, for example, if I've worked on a drama before that has no science fiction, but there's a physicist in it, I work with the prop department and I write the equations on the whiteboard, for example. And so I work with prop departments all the time on like gadgets that we're going to see on the screen and what their functionality is. And what's interesting too is, again, you have to draw that thread. I don't think I have any that I can talk about right now that I'm trying to think of. I think, some of the changes we've made to the tricorder, or we did the comm badges for the later seasons of Discovery had like hollow programming on them, and so kind of talking about that, how we would design those, how they would interface with those, at least putting a little thought into it. Prop masters are some of the coolest people to work with because they just get to invent gadgets that are like, they don't have to worry if the engineering works. They just want to make something cool that has some functionality. And so I come in where they're like, does this make sense that this could do it? And I've had a lot of fun with that, for sure.
Thank you.
You mentioned when we first started that you were working on Starfleet Academy.
Mm-hmm.
I know they just wrapped up their season. Can you say anything at all about it? Or is that just mum's the word DNR, can't say anything at all?
I mean, pretty much. I will say I have not been able to visit the set because they film up in Toronto. I would do a lot of illegal things to be able to go to that set. But I haven't been able to make that work. If working on Starfleet Academy means I get to meet Paul Giamatti at some point in my life, I'm gonna be so excited. Like I I would love to. I've been a fan of his for so long, and the fact that he's on that show, and he's like a huge Star Trek nerd, which is also really exciting. When I find that out about some of these actors, I'm like, I just want to hang out with you. Like, I promise I'm cool. Please. And so, yeah, it's just my take on it, like from what public knowledge is out there, but my own personal take. It's a different approach to Star Trek, like they all are. I think it's a weird time as a Star Trek fan, especially if you've been around for a while. We were used to one season at a time, like one show at a time, and then we had a glorious overlap of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and a little bit of TNG and Deep Space Nine. But other than that, those were just kind of baton handoffs. And otherwise, they pretty much existed independently. And so if you wanted to watch Star Trek, you had one show to watch. Now they're airing one at a time, but we're getting like 2 or 3 a year new seasons of different shows of Star Trek. And I think the big mind shift for us is that not every Star Trek show is going to be made for me. They want to introduce new generations to Star Trek, and I think that's glorious. We all have our Star Trek that hit us, and I want people to find their Star Trek. And it might not be Deep Space Nine. It might not be Next Generation. It might be Starfleet Academy. And so, the people who were working on that show came from sort of CW shows. It's obviously a Starfleet Academy show, so it's going to be sort of a young adult themed audience. But, so you might watch it and it might not be exactly your thing, but remember, first seasons of all Star Trek, you got a grain of salt it, man. I think we all forget that. How often do you rewatch season 1 of TNG? Like, be honest. and so it's like giving it that chance, but also thinking of the people in your life that you've always wanted to share Star Trek with. This Starfleet Academy or Prodigy or Lower Decks, I think, are great ways to sit down and be like, hey, I want to introduce you to something that means a lot to me. I think you'd really like this show. Might not be your favorite, but like, we'll get to Voyager. Like, we'll get to TNG. I just got to get you hooked through Starfleet Academy. So I'm excited to see how it looks. It's fun. It's cool stories.
Did you do any consulting work on Section 31?
Oh, Section 31 was a journey, man. So I don't know how many of you remember this, but Section 31 started out as a TV series, as a spin-off from Star Trek Discovery. And that happened in, I want to say, December of 2019. And a few months later, everything shut down right when they were at a crucial point in the development of a TV season where you basically get money to keep going. And studios were not doing that. And so they kind of put the show on ice. And so I did a lot on the initial development of the Section 31 show. And then all of that got shelved. Everyone dealt with a pandemic. People moved on to different shows. Other jobs came up. And then when they were in a financial position and Michelle Yeoh's schedule opened up, they took what material they had and they turned it into a movie. I wasn't involved in any of the later process with that. I was just part of like some of the world building that they had done on the original Section 31 show. So there were some characters that kind of kept through. Some of those like worlds that they were living in, some concepts changed over time. Some characters like they combined into one. So it was a lot of changes that happened, but not a lot of what I contributed kind of made it into the final cut, because you're not going to take a giant show and then be able to tell that in an hour and a half. So we're not going to get into the scientific world building of the nebula that they live in.
Those are the questions that everybody sent me to ask you. Since we've got 12 people here, if anybody would like to ask a question, now's your opportunity to do so. Just raise your hand and go ahead and start. I think Matt has the first question.
So, Erin, you mentioned that you were a instructor at Starfleet Academy on Prodigy. Do you want to rephrase that role now, since they literally have a Starfleet Academy series?
So the issue is Starfleet Academy takes place 900 years. It takes place in the same era of Discovery, so 900 years in the future, so in the 31st century. But clearly this Erin, has time traveled to Starfleet Academy in the future, so I don't see why I wouldn't time travel again another 900 years, I would love to be there. Really, what I'm trying to do is create a Dr. Erin multiverse where it's like my own MCU. It's not the Kurtzman verse, man. This is the Dr. Erin verse that we're creating. And so I've been mentioned in Lower Decks. At one point, Shax shouted out among a bunch of other people, Dr. Erin said we can't do that. So I exist in the Lower Decks universe. There was a comic series called The Dog of War, which I highly recommend. It was a Deep Space Nine comic series about a corgi that gets loose from the holodeck and causes Deep Space Nine shenanigans, and it's hilarious. But in that, Jadzia Dax writes to a friend of hers at Daystrom Institute asking for information and gets a note back from Dr. Erin MacDonald at Daystrom Institute. So I'm friends with Jadzia Dax. And then I showed up in Star Trek Online as the science officer on Harry Kim's ship. so we're working it in there. It's all the same character. And at some point, I'm going to Jillian Jacobs myself out of our world.
Sounds like Memory Alpha needs to update their information so that they have all of these particular pieces of information on Dr. Erin.
You know, it's whatever memory beta, whatever. But it still excites me.
That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Yeah, they need to get you up north and into a uniform. Get you in there. Anybody else have a question? Anyone? Can't see. I think John and Stephanie, we can't hear you. You're muted. Are you trying to say something? No.
Okay, you're good. I'll contribute. Favorite series academically, Deep Space Nine. Favorite series emotionally, Voyager. I can't count anything I've worked on because I'm too close to those. I did cry when they canceled Prodigy, so I'll tell you that. I also cried. I'm attached to all the new shows, but Voyager is like in my soul. Favorite captain, Janeway. Favorite character, Garrick. Let me think. First episode of Star Trek I ever watched was at a college party, because I was a physics major, and the Venn diagram of Star Trek fans and physics majors is a pretty big intersection. And I made the mistake of saying I'd never seen an episode of Star Trek at a physics party, and the room went silent, and then they debated, and all the DVDs came out, and they sat me down, and we watched Measure of a Man, which I think was a pretty good way to get me into Star Trek. So, first full Star Trek episode I ever watched was Measure of a Man. I think, yeah.
Do you know if Netflix is going to do another season of Prodigy?
If I have any control, I wish they would. I know nothing. As far as I know, none of the people I work with know nothing. If they would tell me or not, I don't know. I had a conversation with the Hagemans, who are the showrunners for Prodigy, about it, because we've all moved on. Like, we all have different projects and different shows and everything. So it would be a lot. And Netflix never paid for production, right? They just bought the property and then aired it. Like, season 2 was already done when they bought it. And so they never paid for a writer's room or the animators or anything. And so that would require a huge amount of investment on them. I think it's worth it. I think they would get the people involved. I think pretty much everyone who worked on Prodigy would join immediately at the drop. It was such a great show to work on. But I talked to the Hagemans about it, and they were like in mixed minds, right? Because it was such a high. Season 2 was so good, and it ended so well. Like, no pressure, right? Coming back for a season 3. Like, there's that. It's like no one to get out, man. And yes, they only got 2 seasons, but they got 2 20-episode seasons. Like, that's effectively 4 seasons of the shows we have now. So, obviously, I mean, I love that show. I hope there's more, but what's there? I just want kids to find it. I want everyone to find it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Anyone?
James?
Oh, James.
Yeah. if they asked you to come back for more, would you prefer to continue working in the time frames of most of the shows we have now, or would you prefer to continue exploring into the 900 years in the future? Like,
That's a good question. I think I like both. I like both of them. I think, you know, the 24th, 25th century, I think Picard spilled into the 25th century. Like, I know that era. I love that era. It's a comfortable era for me. I think the far 31st century, that's where like Discovery and Starfleet Academy are living. It's a little more challenging just with new technologies, trying to reset what does the Federation look like now, what does Starfleet Academy look like now, and it gives you kind of a hint for what they're looking for. But I like that. There's some interesting questions about that, and I think it forces us to take a step back and think like, okay, we're out of that world. Like, these people that we revere no longer exist, and so what does it look like? So I don't know. I like working in the 31st century, but honestly, like, if I could just hang out with Captain Janeway, that'd be my first choice.
Damon, you got a question?
Yes, I do. Have you ever run into, speaking of challenging situations, have you ever run into Shatner, and how did you handle him? If you did.
I have met Shatner once, briefly, but as a fan. So I was speaking at a Star Trek convention that he was at, and my father-in-law is a big original series fan, and so he had a big birthday coming up. So my husband and I, we stole one of his VHSs, one of his TOS episodes, his favorite TOS episode, and we snuck that out of his house. And then I pretty much I didn't get any special treatment, but because I had so many events going on, they did let me cut the line. So if anyone saw that happen, I'm really sorry. I felt really guilty about it. But he was just insane. I'm sure if some of you have met him, he barely even looks up. Like, he just signs and moves on, signs and moves on. So that's the only interaction I've had with Shatner. I've met most of the actors. Janeway is obviously still like, geez, oh Pete. The first time I met her was before I was working on Star Trek, and I was speaking at a convention, but I wasn't with Star Trek, and I brought my PhD dissertation, because my dissertation, in the acknowledgments section where you kind of shout out your supervisor and family, everyone who supported you, at the end I ended it with, to Captain Catherine Janeway. Like, she got me through my PhD, and she'll never know, you know, how much that meant. And so I had her sign that, but this poor woman is in the middle of like action figures and photos, and then I'm like, here's a astrophysics dissertation, and she kind of was taken aback, and she was touched, and I had a chance to meet her later for a photo, and she told me she was proud of me, which was a lot. And then years pass, I work on Prodigy, I get to write lines for Captain Janeway, I've come full circle in my life, and I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and they did a Prodigy panel. They showed an episode, and then they did a panel afterwards. And for people who worked on the show, they kind of just let everyone know that they had a green room, and they were setting aside seats for all of us so we could go to that, because it was special, and Prodigy had already ended at that point. This was for season 2. And so we got to see each other, and then Kate Mulgrew walked in, and I went, oh no. And I ended up talking to her. She like acknowledged who I was. She didn't remember me. She says she remembers. She doesn't have to remember. It's fine. But then during the panel, she gave a shout out to me, as like, she just said, can we just recognize our science advisor and all the great work that she's done on our show? And then I died. And I honestly walked away from that experience, and I was like, if Star Trek fires me tomorrow, I'm good. Like, I am at peace with everything that I've done. So yeah, I've had some good experience. The only last name drop, shameless story I'll tell was when I got hired for Star Trek. Remember, I was already doing all of these conventions. So a lot of the regular actors that you've seen knew who I was, or at least would recognize my face. And I got hired, and they let Jonathan Frakes, who was directing one of the episodes, know that I was on the team and that he could reach out to me if he had any questions. And he called me out of the blue and just went, Erin, it's Frakes. He just said, I want you to know I'm really proud of you, and I'm really glad you're part of the team, and I want to welcome you to the Star Trek family. And and I saved the contact. But yeah, that was such a, I don't know, just a special touch, just to shout out like people who are really the good ones, like Frakes really is a good one. And yeah, just for him to take the time to do that, he knew that would mean a lot to me. And so yeah, that was special. And I have his phone number.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Anyone? Well, Dr. Erin,
Thank you.
we really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and being with us tonight. We really do appreciate it. Enjoyed having the time to spend with you at SpaCon, and then now we really do appreciate you and your contribution, to Star Trek and to the fandom that we all love, and your dedication to education of our young people as well as the old people like myself is really appreciated. So
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we will go ahead and finish out this evening with Dr. Erin, and we will post the this on YouTube. It's a private YouTube. We'll send you the link so that you have it, and then everybody else can take a look at it. And we wish you all the best in everything that you do, whether it is Star Trek related or a resurgence of brain just decided to stop working. A resurgence of what the TV show. So I can't even remember now. Oh, my brain is going nuts. Well, with whatever you do, we do wish you all the best, and I'll be in touch with you later on and give you all the information that we have, and hopefully get the charity from you. So
sounds good. Thank you all so much. It was nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you. Thank you for the questions, and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Everyone else, have a fantastic evening. Please be safe in everything that you do, and we'll see you at the next event that we have coming up. Talk to you later.